of Dr. Christine Hubbard. So do my little thank you. Here you are. I'm delighted to be here, especially to discuss the importance of teaching. I have asked UTD's resident teaching expert, Dr. Karen Huxtable-Jester, to deliver the main presentation, and she will be joining us in about 10 minutes because she's busy teaching right now. So I'd just like to start off by saying there are really two ways, at least for me, of looking at college teaching. And one is inside the classroom, the content, the student expectations, grading, textbooks, pedagogy in all of its forms. And then outside of the classroom, in other words, the student's life, hardships, circumstances, strengths, abilities, access to technology, support systems, ability to buy textbooks, and beyond, the list goes on. And usually we don't really include outside of the classroom discussions when we're talking about teaching, because it's often a discussion that happens among student affairs staff and administrators and others around campus when we talk about student success. So Dr. Huxtable will speak to you primarily about inside the classroom and the pedagogy, and I would like to just kind of reflect briefly on the professor or instructor in a more holistic view. So we strive for continuous improvement, or at least that's what we should be doing as faculty. But just as most of us never received training in how to teach, at least I didn't, we also did not necessarily learn how to help students succeed in the larger sense. I did not receive training in that either, except for when I worked in youth development years and years ago. So we all know as faculty, and often at research universities, many faculty prefer to do research instead of teach. Some have open contempt for undergraduate teaching, as I've read in Dr. Gail Mellow's book, which kind of prompted some of these conversations after she joined us for a presentation at UTD. And I've noticed, thank goodness, that doesn't happen at UTD for the most part. We're really well known for being an undergraduate mentoring university where faculty are deeply and enthusiastically engaged with our undergraduates, but I've seen it elsewhere in places where I have worked. But today, it's funny, I was kind of thinking back and getting nostalgic, thinking about my mother's education. She grew up very, very poor on a farm in Idaho and also in Colorado, but she was admitted to a women's college on the East Coast. So she took a train east and arrived just shell-shocked and still poor. So she found a job selling men's underwear at Sears, and we still joke her to this day about that. But she made enough money to kind of make ends meet through college, and she knew she was going to be there because there was not enough money, and she couldn't leave work, but not enough for the train ride home until the next summer. So she tells these stories, and kind of what got her through that first year was that her professors invited her to their houses, and she learned how to set a formal table and was introduced to foods she didn't know existed. And on holidays, friends would take her home with them to their families' houses or on their families' vacations. And at every occasion, she picked up new life skills kind of along the way, and found adults and support systems where she could count on if she needed help. And she gained enough confidence to attend law school, and she later served on the board of directors of her alma mater. So those were the good old days, and those very personal interactions are needed more than ever, but are really no longer in fashion. We just are not that close to our students anymore, and these things, these informal ways of teaching are kind of gone. They've gone by the wayside. So I was thinking, how can we better replicate what we now would call, wraparound services, at least for me in the youth development field, but just a way for students to have that support system or safety net, both in and outside of the classroom. So I've been thinking more about that since various administrators at now Dallas College, or soon to be Dallas College, if you are on here, I appreciate your advice to me early on. You asked me to think about better communicating these resources to community college students, really at our very first. So in other words, the classroom should not just be an exercise in intellectual capital building. It really has the opportunity, the classroom and the teaching and excellence in teaching has the opportunity to be so much more than just inside the classroom. So UTD recently highlighted a few students in a video who are thanking their faculty for work they had done this spring and the changeover with COVID. And over, the theme just, it gives me goosebumps that kept coming up. They kept saying, thank you for checking in on me. It means so much. We really appreciated this professor. He would call, he would check, he would send emails, how are you doing? And they were so appreciative that it just made them feel like they had a place to go. So in taking college seriously, I think sometimes we forget that just checking in could be a major part of our role in helping students succeed. But we can also think about what we do to bring the outside into the classroom. And these are just some things that I've thought about and that I'm doing this year and I have done in the past. One is simply reducing stress, and that can come in all sorts of forms. For me, it's open educational resources, getting rid of expensive textbooks and replacing them with free materials. It's amazing what you can find online, and really actually getting rid of the textbook has been freeing in some ways, because all of a sudden it gives me time to teach students about the difference in government reports versus think tanks versus journal articles, and how to interpret this information and know when it's reliable or not. Also listing campus resources on the syllabus, and encouraging students to check in if something's wrong, or just check in, but also checking back on them. And truthfully, watching employment trends and marketable skills. I think we forget this sometimes as faculty, maybe more just not thinking about it as we should, and watching those trends. So teaching what is current and linking intellectual exercises to the real world and potential job experiences. And there's quite a bit we can do in addition to and within this kind of theoretical and critical thinking skills that we need our students to learn in the classroom. Last year, I introduced Center for Disease Control certificates in my class, and they weren't overly difficult, but in the end, it was just a few short exercises, and the students had 4 certificates, from program evaluation to public health to, I forgot, ethics, from the Centers for Disease Control. And it's just more line items that make them more marketable. This year, I'm adding Tableau desktop fundamentals. It's free for students. They can just get online and just keep accruing more information on how to use these platforms that so many people are using now. So, and in assigning grades, but we assign grades. I'm checking the time here. I'm not sure if Karen has joined us yet. Please feel free to interrupt me. But also allowing students to demonstrate mastery or competency in areas can, in essence, be a marketable skill. So one other thing that I've been doing is offering students no credit, non-paid internships. Essentially, they don't sign up through the University of Texas at Dallas. They come to me and they say, these are the types of jobs I'm applying for. These are the skills I would like to learn. And then we kind of build an internship around that. So again, they have something on their resume where they can talk to employers about what they learned. So instructors can be more adaptable in taking college teaching seriously, I believe. Really, times have changed, and it's now more important. Oh, good, I see Karen's coming in. I didn't realize I'd get a note. So I'll finish up here in a minute. But holistic teaching may be needed more than ever right now. Even just a small note on the syllabus that says, there's a food pantry on campus, and you can access it even though we're teaching virtually right now. It's still open, and here's how you find it. We did do a study at UTD, and we found out that the UTD students who were accessing the food pantry, their GPA went up a full grade, is my recollection, but it was impressive. And we know how much these services really matter. So finally, and given the audience we have here, personally, I would love to see more communication among community college and four-year faculty about teaching, and not just always pathways, not just always administrative duties, but really talking about students' strengths and needs and market and employment changes. So Christine, I was going to give you a hard time and say maybe you and I could develop some type of online platform someday to bring faculty from the colleges together. Maybe you already have this and I'm not on it, but if we could somehow do that by, major field of study, it might be interesting if we just have these kind of free conversations. So, or maybe we can do that at UTD somehow, but it's something that's been in the back of my mind. So I see Karen is on. I would just, if you don't mind, I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce you a little more formally. Okay, I can't hear you. But Dr. Karen Huxtable-Jester teaches educational psychology, social psychology, and social and personality development. She also serves as the Associate Director for the Center for Teaching and Learning. In that role, she provides consultation and creates teaching-related professional development opportunities for doctoral students and faculty. Dr. Huxtable-Jester also serves as chair of UT Dallas's Academic Senate Committee on Effective Teaching, which works to promote teaching excellence across the campus. She has been awarded the Regents Outstanding Teaching Award for the University of Texas System, as well as the Senior Choice and Excellence in Teaching Awards for the School of Behavioral and Brain Sciences. And I believe you also received the the prestigious Piper Teaching Award. And Dr. Huxtable-Jester earned a bachelor's degree from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst and her master's and doctoral degrees from The Ohio State University. And in 2017, she was inducted into the UT System Academy of Distinguished Teachers. So you see why I invited her here to talk to us today. It's pretty evident. So I will go on mute now, and Karen, just whenever you need the screen flipped, I have control here and I'll push the button.
All right, sounds great.
Okay, so as we head into the presentation, please know that I've put some directions in the chat box. We'd like for everybody to rename themselves so that we know who's talking. We'd also like for you, when we get to interactive portions, to be sure to have your camera on if possible. I will be managing the participants and the chat area. I also want to mention that we're recording this session, and Dr. Huxtable-Jester's presentation and her recommended reading links are already available on our event page about an hour after this presentation ends. I will also post the recorded video on our page as well. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Karen. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Getting used to the slightly weird background, but it's better than seeing my dining room. And I apologize for being late. I was actually teaching my class. But I'm really excited to have this chance to talk with you today. And as we were planning out what would be interesting, we were talking about the visit from Gail Mello to UT Dallas earlier in the spring before everybody got shut down. Dr. Mello was I don't know how much you might have discussed this already, but she helped us to talk a lot about how do we engage in professional development? How do we take ideas that we learn about teaching and turn them into action in our classrooms? How do we figure out ways to not just get a good idea, but to keep it going and work on it and make it part of our practice? Because it's so easy to get a great idea and then forget that you were ever going to implement it and just never get around to it. And so that's the kind of thing that I think would be interesting for us to discuss today. So let's go to the next slide. Awesome. This is a quotation from Stephen Chu, and it's something that I happen to really like, so I wanted to share it with you. When I teach graduate students about teaching, quite often the first thing they say in terms of what do I need to know, what do I need to do, they will say that they are nervous about running out of things to say. They're nervous about not having all the answers. They think more about what they're saying than about what their students are learning. But what Stephen Chu reminds us is teaching is not just a matter of being able to explain things clearly or in an interesting way. If it were that simple, it wouldn't be such a challenge. But what we're really trying to do is develop student understanding. We're trying to change people. We're trying to change the way they think, the way they understand themselves, the way they understand the world. This is a challenge that is never going to get old because we are never finished with trying to improve the way we help students learn. So you can maybe learn how to teach quickly, but you'll never finish trying to get better at teaching. This is something that will take an entire career, and no one's ever finished improving their teaching. So let's go to the next slide. Of course, we all want to get better at teaching, but the question is always, well, how? We actually know a lot about how to get better at teaching because we know so much about motivation, cognitive psychology, and cognitive science. But we know that there are lots of other things going on in terms of, how do we figure out what to put into action, and how do we really try new things in our classrooms? So what I thought I would ask everyone who's part of our session today is, what are the things that are holding you back when you think about ways that you'd like to be innovative or to improve your teaching? And feel free to unmute your microphone and go ahead and say, what are some things that hold you back? I'll let you think about it for a moment. And if we don't have anybody who's willing to share, because this is difficult sometimes with these sessions, we can go ahead and talk about what I thought of as possible things. Do we have anyone who's ready?
Also cold call people if you'd like.
Well, we'll have a moment when we do that after a bit. So I'll save that innovation for later in our session. So let's go to the next slide instead. Yeah, well, there we go. If we go to the next slide, you'll see that's the first thing. Most of us, if we stop and think about what's really holding us back from being more innovative and from implementing changes in the way we teach, it's lack of time to do it. This is part of why, too, the books that you may have heard of, if you like this sort of thing, are by James Lang or Flower Darby and James Lang. He wrote first the book called Small Teaching, which has taken off like wildfire because he fills it full of small ideas about how to make big changes in your teaching, but they don't take a lot of preparation. They don't take a lot of advanced planning, and therefore it fits with people's busy schedules and their ability to try this one small thing. So Flower Darby's book, it was a follow-up to that. It's called Small Teaching Online, and she has the same idea of ways to improve your teaching that don't take a lot of time and planning. But most of us, if we think about what gets in the way, it's lack of time. We have a hard time planning to bring about changes in our teaching, planning to try new things, new assignments, new approaches, and so forth. We also sometimes are in a position where we don't have enough time because we just teach so much. So for a lot of people, it could be that, you'd love to be more innovative with your teaching, but you're teaching 4 or 5 or 6 classes a semester. Maybe there's no break between classes because you teach all summer long as well. It could be that there's very little time to do more than just get through each day. If you are a researcher, it could be that you're being rewarded more for your research productivity than for your teaching. And so that ends up being where you put your time. And there could be things like structural obstacles that get in your way. In a face-to-face classroom, it could be the nature of the classroom itself that keeps you from using more innovative approaches. Or it could be that when you try to use more perhaps active learning approaches in your classroom, that students don't like it. And if you have to worry about how students are responding to your classes, you might feel pressured to do something that makes them a little more happy. Like sometimes they just want you to give them the answers and let them tell you what the answers were that you told them, as opposed to doing the hard work of teaching and coming up with new ideas and analyzing and engaging in critical thinking and so forth. So certainly this is part of it. But if we go to the next slide, there's also, of course, fear of failure. And I don't want to be glib about this because this is a real thing. Not only does research on teaching change and teaching practices show us that one of the main reasons faculty give is that they don't want to try something and have it fail. They don't want to try something and look stupid, but they don't want to try something and risk wasting their students' time or harming their students in some way. And so I put that on the next slide. That it's not just a lack of time to put into your teaching, to bring about change, but it also could be that you don't have time to fail. You can't take that risk of something not working because you don't necessarily have time to go back and fix it, and you can't risk jeopardizing your students' learning when their learning is so important. They need what you're teaching them. They need to have this high level of challenge, these high standards, but also support for achieving your standards. It might be that you'd like to try something new, but you don't want to make a mistake and possibly keep them from achieving their goals. So let's go to the next slide here and think about what we can do, because sometimes you have a teaching development center available for you that will help you try new things and learn new ways of teaching. But sometimes you don't have that, or sometimes you don't have a lot of time to participate in that sort of thing. One of the main recommendations I always make when people ask me about this is, what do I do when I don't have a lot of resources? We can all develop habits of reflection. It's something I recommend to all new faculty, but really this is something that's important for a very experienced faculty as well. We don't have a lot of time for it, but if you just get in the habit, if you don't do this already, of keeping a log or a journal of some kind where you just jot down, maybe after each class or at least once a week, what went well, what went poorly, what was going on in the class today, what worked in this lesson. You might even have particular incidents where something went spectacularly well or spectacularly poorly, and you don't want to forget that for the future. When it happens, we always think we're not going to forget, but in fact, we're very likely to forget. It's just like when your kids say cute things when they're little and you think you'll always remember them, but if you don't write them down, you don't remember them, even if it was something you really thought you would remember forever. We don't remember as much as we think we will. So with the reflection, we want to make sure that we are keeping track, and it could be critical incident analysis where we're talking about specific things, or it could be something more general. But keep track of, well, what did we do today? How did it go? And what does this tell me about where we're going for the future? Reflection is where we benefit from our experiences. And without reflection, you can be a first-year teacher for 40 years because you've never learned from the experiences. You've never figured out what to do to act on this. So quite often, people talk about something that they call teaching style. And they'll say things like, I like your teaching style, or, I need to develop my teaching style. What I prefer as a term for this is really teaching decisions, because what we think of as teaching style is really a manifestation of choices that we make. And teaching is all about choices about how to connect with our students, choices about how to share content and so forth. But all of these decisions are based in our philosophy of teaching, what we assume and what we know about teaching research, about learning and cognition and motivation, and all of the other things that go into what comes out as a teaching decision. And we just have a shortcut term that we call teaching style, but teaching style is really teaching decisions. These decisions have to come from the reflection that we engage in. So reflecting is what's leading us to improving our teaching, and ultimately to acting on new things that we can try, new ways of going about it. So let's go to the next slide, because I don't remember what's on it until I see it. Remembering that reflection is social. So when people ask, what can I do? And we think about some of our most successful efforts at UT Dallas through the Center for Teaching and Learning, it's really about getting people connected to each other. The most popular events that we have, the most popular things that we do really come down to giving people a chance to talk with each other. They don't have a lot of time to do this, and they don't casually come into contact with each other, and that's more the case now than ever, now that we're all in our dining rooms or wherever. So finding ways to connect with colleagues doesn't have to cost a lot of institutional money to do, but forming a teaching circle where people in the same discipline who teach different sections of the same course, or maybe who are from completely different areas, just get together to talk about teaching ideas. One of the most popular things we do at UT Dallas is we have reading groups. And I'm actually participating in a national reading group coming up soon, in which we'll read Small Teaching Online by Flower Darby, because I keep meaning to read it and I haven't gotten around to it. So this accountability is going to get me there. having somebody to talk to share ideas with, even if it's just one teaching buddy that you have as somebody to reflect with, someone to explain things to. We also want to make sure that even though we always want to use evidence-informed practices or evidence-based practices, it's also useful to make sure that we're generating evidence of what our students are learning at the same time. So when we use assessment frequently with feedback for students to help them to demonstrate what they're learning, this is also how we can test whether our innovations are effective. You know, I tried a new way of teaching research methods. Did it work? I tried a new way of getting the point across about organic chemistry. Did they actually learn it better this way? So when we generate our own evidence, we can evaluate the quality of our teaching and our innovations, and that itself can be motivating to keep doing more of that innovation. In Gail Mellow's book, the one about taking college teaching seriously, she mentions something called appreciative coaching. Now, with her method, it's this whole kind of expensive software system that's used for people interacting and keeping track of their reflections. We can do that without necessarily having an entire software system if we have groups of people or just a buddy that you engage in appreciative coaching with, where you share what worked, you share what has been successful for you. And that's actually something I want to talk about a little bit more. You don't necessarily need to get people together to talk about their teaching and look for what do they need to improve. So here's where I think you need to change, or here's where you should try something different. That doesn't really help anybody very well. And when Gail Mellow actually tried that at LaGuardia Community College years ago, they found that actually didn't improve at all, and was actually made people self-conscious, made people not want to share what they've been up to. But appreciative coaching is where you have people share what's been successful for them, and then the rest of the group can point out where that seems effective and get more information from the person who tried it about what made it work. So let's go to the next slide where the cold calling might come in. So I want you to try this for a moment. Think of something that you've done in teaching a class, if you teach, and if you don't teach, I suppose you could use it what you've tried with any session where you're actually leading people or motivating people or getting people to do something, because so much of that is teaching also. Think of one of the best things that you've tried in a class recently, some strategy, some activity, some approach that went really well. What I'm going to ask you to do now is share, and I was hoping we could get at least 3 examples from people, just to give us an example of something you've done that you thought was actually really successful. And you can volunteer, you don't have to be called on.
And I put a note in the chat box. Let me know if you'd like to speak and I'll unmute you.
This is something
Okay,
we do in
Jean,
class
let me
too.
go ahead and unmute you.
Thank you, Jean. Did the unmute not work?
We're working on it, right?
Oh, there we go. I think it's going to work. I got a message.
There. Hey, Jean.
Hi, I'm Jean Keller from the University of North Texas, and I teach an introduction leadership class. And I've had the students write an autobiography about the roles that they've had with leadership throughout their life. And the students have really enjoyed this, whether they were an older brother or sister, whether they were a camp counselor, whatever they have done. And it seems to really kind of give them a perspective.
Oh, that's marvelous. That's really great. And that's the kind of example that we can get together with other people to talk about. Do we have another one? Looks like somebody else is willing to share one. So while that gets set up, what we're doing when we share these ideas is we're sharing, not only just the idea itself, which may or may not be applicable to other classes, but we're also sharing the spirit of innovation. And so when we are talking about how do we go from learning an idea somewhere in a workshop or in a book you read and actually turning that into action, that's quite often the hard part. But when we hear about other people doing it, it can be inspiring.
So we have somebody who's joined by iPhone. I show that you are unmuted now. Can you tell us who you are?
Hi, this is Debbie Hannes. I'm from Dallas College.
Great. Go ahead and give us one of the examples of something you've tried in a class recently, something that went well.
So when we went through COVID-19, I teach the students that are in co-requisite math, and the students are being required by state to do the co-requisite and the college algebra at the same time. And so when COVID-19 hit, we were just getting to the college algebra material. We had pretty much finished most of our remediation material. And so in my online classes, I've always relied on just YouTube videos and videos that the publisher makes or videos that I make, but I don't do a lot of live classes, etc. And so I was forced by COVID to go into doing basically virtual live classes. And so this summer, we're all online, and my class was supposed to be an all online class this summer. And I reached out to all my students online and said, hey, I'm going to do a virtual class the first day of summer class. If you just want to come and introduce yourself to me and let me know what's going on. I know this is a really tough summer class. It's going to go real fast. Let me know. And I had 3 students that were very energetic show up and said, I'm a visual learner. I can't read math and learn it on my own. I didn't want to take this online. Is there anything you can do to help us? And I said, you know what? I'm more than happy to do virtual classes. As long as you show up, I'll do virtual classes. And it has been, I now have 8 or 9 students coming to my sessions, and they're all saying that it's different for them doing the virtual online as opposed to all the videos and such. And with COVID-19, it has just really helped me to become a better communicator with the students via email. And they also are being better at communicating with me. So I think that going forward, this virtual classroom, even if we, when we finally get back in the classroom, is going to be a way for me to engage with students when they're at home at night having a question. That personal interaction with these students that are at risk seem to make such a difference for them. I did not realize to the amount it would make a difference.
That's tremendous. And that's something that we see in so many ways, that really teaching is about connections. And, of course, content matters. And I'm never going to be one who says, we don't need to teach content, because that's exactly why we're here. We're here to teach content and ways of thinking and so forth. But you do it by way of connections, like you just described. And in the previous example with the autobiographical information from students, to get them to use that self-reference effect of connecting the ideas about leadership to their sense of self. And they're really transforming their sense of who they are as they're learning to become leaders. When we make connections with students who are struggling in a course, maybe they're in developmental classes, helping them to feel connected, to feel like they belong, like they're valued, and that like struggle is part of the process and not an indication that they can't be successful, that's going to make a huge difference to them. So, showing them you can be successful, here's how you can be successful, promoting that sense of belonging is so tremendous. And so when we're sharing ideas like this, we can start to sort of interrogate them and take them apart and look at what works, what made this so effective. And we quite often do that through these conversations. You can do it on your own with reflection, but it's even better when you have someone to share it with. and to share these ideas with.
So Karen, we do have one more who's willing to share.
Wonderful.
And this is Mike Turpin from Kilgore College. Mike, we're ready when you are.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I teach music appreciation and have for a lot of years. And one of the things that I started doing a number of years ago was to give all of the students a questionnaire, sort of an intake questionnaire on the very first class day. And they're divided up into groups. And so there are certain things on that questionnaire that they have to, as they introduce themselves to their group, certain things that they have to talk about. And two of the things are what's my favorite kind of music and my least favorite kind of music. And then I collect all of those sheets, mix them up, and I call the roll, first class day. And I ask the group that they're in, I ask their group questions about that person. What city are they from? What's their least favorite kind of music? I don't go through the entire thing, but it really gets, it's really very amusing, really breaks the ice. And when we get down to thinking about what people's favorite kind of music and least favorite kind of music, because it really opens the door for me to introduce the whole semester, because there are a lot of different kinds of music that they identify. But it also allows us to talk about why certain things move us, why we like certain things and don't like certain things, what are our biases in terms of what we like and what we dislike. And I remember the time that someone said, and always get this in a class, that their least favorite kind of music is opera. And you see a lot of students nodding their head. And I said, okay, so tell me, what was the last opera that you heard? And of course, they all start laughing because they realize that they've made an opinion about something when it's not something that they have experienced before. And so we have a lot of sort of ideas that and assumptions that we make about different kinds of music without really having experienced them before. And so it just opens up a tremendous wide variety of things that we can talk about, how we form opinions and what they're based on in our biases and so forth. And it's this particular idea is usable, I think, in a lot of disciplines. But it's a good way to break the ice, and it actually gives me a really good way of talking about the things that we're going to be talking about through the semester. They really understand that it's okay to like certain things and not to like certain things. When I tell them, I say, I've got a secret for you. I really don't care for opera either, but it's part of, it's part of our history, and we do talk about it. And so, I noticed that since I started doing that in the classes that really engage with this, really they form a connection with each other very early on. And there actually has been greater retention in those classes when they have this sort of, for lack of a better word, bonding activity from the very beginning.
That's marvelous. And it shows, I think it's a terrific example about how our courses are so much more than just the content. It's about these connections. And one way to look at it is to think about the three possibilities of students' connections to the content, students' connections to each other, and students' connection to the faculty member. That we want to find ways to support all of these, whether we're teaching online or in person. And I love how this example is not only a way to have this icebreaker at the beginning of the course, but really sets up the themes of the course and the philosophy of the course at the same time. It's terrific for that. And that's what we're trying to accomplish, that it's more than just, I've got slides to click through. And my job is to deliver this material and do it as quickly as possible, hopefully in an interesting way. It's really about so much more than that. When we're thinking about the ways in which we can be innovative, the ways in which we can take ideas about teaching and apply them, it's about integrating them into this kind of context. What is it that this is going to serve in my class? It's easy to find ideas. We come across a lot of teaching ideas through events like Lunch and Learns and books we can read and articles and talking to other people. But putting them into practice is quite often where we need to have that reflection that we share with others, that we can try and develop evidence of what works and what doesn't work. Let's go to the next slide here. Because I want to talk a little bit about sort of the big picture of Gail Mellow's book, because I don't know what you talked about before I joined you today, but I think it was a mention of that because it was in the invitation. But I also wanted to give an example. So if I were to give a couple of examples of things that I've done recently, my example of something that I tried was something I did actually for the first time just this past fall, and then I did again in the spring semester. And it was that I asked students at the end of the class, and this was because I didn't know how it would work. It was for 1 point out of 300, and they did it anyway, even though it wasn't going to change anybody's grade. But several students did it, and it was marvelous. I asked them to just get out a cell phone or a webcam or whatever is convenient for them and record themselves for 2 or 3 minutes telling me what they learned in the course. And it was fantastic because what they learned turned out to be the big picture ideas of what I really wanted them to learn. They learned the big ideas of, what do I hope they'll, actually the way I phrased it was, what do you hope you'll remember about this course 10 years from now? And I got the idea from Pooja Agarwal, the author of Powerful Teaching, which a book I recommended. It's not in the list at the end of these slides. So what do you hope you'll remember at 10 years from now after this course is over? And they were able, all the ones who chose to do the assignment for almost no credit, they were able to articulate that. They were able to explain, what it is that really matters, even beyond the content and the exam questions and the little things. They got the big things. And so that was wonderfully gratifying to see. But another thing that I've also been thinking a lot about lately, actually for several years now, and trying to communicate to other faculty, is ways in which we think about rigor in our courses. So I know that Christine recommended to everybody the Little Orange Book, published by the UT System Academy of Distinguished Teachers. The actual physical book is something that I'm not part of it all because they did that before I joined the Academy. But they had a new e-version, which is available, and I recommend because it's beautifully done. And I didn't do it, which is how I can say that, but it's this very nice ebook. And I do have one very small essay in it that was inspired by one of the essays written in the original edition by Mary Lynn Crow at UT Arlington. And she writes in her essay about teaching about the importance of compassion, that we have compassion for our students. And ever since I read that, long before I ever joined the Academy, I was inspired to think about, well, how are we going to think about this? How are we going to implement this in our classes? It's one thing to have an idea, quite another to actually put it into practice. So I started thinking about ways in which we can do this. And this manifesto, if we could go back one slide, this manifesto at the end of the Pedagogy Matters book by Gail Mello is just an articulation of, we are here to teach the whole student. We're not just here to click through slides. We are here to have students learn to think of themselves in new ways, to help them develop their understanding of the world. It doesn't matter what you're teaching. We've all got big ideas, big goals like this. We also can recognize that students face many obstacles to their success, and that our goal is to make sure that all students are successful. So to connect this to the essay by Mary Lynn Crow and what she got me thinking about in terms of how do we put this into practice, and here, this is a very brief summary of the manifesto at the end of that book, I started thinking about the ways in which we think about rigor in our classes and ways that we can put our compassion into action, ways that we can not break the rules for some students, but change the rules so that more students can be successful within them. So for example, many students, when they run into difficulties in classes, will go to the professor and they'll ask for an extension on the paper deadline, or ask to retake an exam, or whatever they ask for. And especially students who've learned that this is successful are more likely to do it. And students who learn to take us at our word don't ask. And quite often these are the students who don't even realize that they could have had this advantage that other students have. We think we're being fair when everybody gets the exception if they ask, but we don't recognize always that not everybody asks. So it got me thinking about ways that we can put measures into place that will protect more students and make it possible for more students to be successful without them having to ask. So let's take a look at the next slide. If we think about teaching as something that we want to do to make all students successful and to create a course that's flexible in advance so that students don't have to ask for extra, it goes like this. For a long time now, many years, I've asked students 2 questions, or really 1 question, at the beginning of every semester. And I asked them, what do you wish your professors understood about you? The other version of the question is, what do you wish people in general would understand about you or other people in general? But when I ask them specifically, what do you wish your professors understood? There are always 2 things that students say. The first is always, and I'm sure your students are similar, they always say, I have so much to do outside of this class. This class is not the only thing that I have to worry about in life. And that's true. Students have many competing responsibilities outside of our classes. They have a lot going on. And I know your students are all the same. The other thing they say, though, is they'll say, I really want to learn. They'll say, I'm excited about this class. They say, I'm excited about being successful. I'm the first in my family to get a degree, or, I'm so excited about becoming, in my classes, becoming a psychologist or a teacher, the things that they care about. But students really do want to learn. They don't come to our classes to not learn generally. Maybe this is different for some, I suppose, not the students I encounter, but generally students will grab hold of an opportunity to learn something. People like to learn generally. But what we also know is that traditional course policies, maybe the kind that we abandoned in the spring semester when we all had to transfer to an emergency way of doing things, the kinds of policies that exist simply because we said so, simply because it's always been done this way, are quite often things we want to question and possibly change. So when I was thinking, how do I bring about a big change in my teaching, thinking about this idea of being more compassionate, more inclusive, promoting success for more students, I thought, well, what kinds of restrictions might exist that don't need to? This has been called by Craig Nelson illusions of rigor, where we have policies in place that really don't exist to improve the course. They might make things more convenient for us, but they don't necessarily. But it's always been done this way. Or, well, of course, students should have to do things in a particular manner because that way I know they know how to follow directions. But is it really necessary? To what extent? And we're always going to need some rules, but to what extent can we change what the rules are, drop the rules, or find a way for more students to be successful without unnecessary procedures or policies? So when we have harsh policies like you get 1 chance to take the exam and the only way you can't take it is if you have a documented excuse and so forth, we had to get rid of a lot of that in the spring because students, we didn't want them coming to class sick. We didn't want them to have other reasons why they would, maybe they don't have a chance to have a doctor's note and so forth. We might not be able to require the usual things. We might sometimes be causing students to suffer and struggle and even drop out when it's got nothing to do with their lack of ability to learn. They can all learn. But we have policies that sometimes get in the way, or procedures that get in the way. And so if we can think of ways that we can come about more flexible policies, we can build in the flexibility. So for example, suppose you already have a procedure where you have 4 exams. Maybe a way to get around that and allow students to, instead of missing an exam, failing an exam, they can still benefit. What if you could give them more than 1 chance at taking an exam? So there's a practice exam, and then there's a retake exam, and maybe they could take both. Maybe everybody gets the chance at a makeup exam that you ordinarily would have given only to the student with the doctor's note. Why not let everybody have it with regard with whether or not they have a note? And why not let everybody take it perhaps you know, even if they already took the exam once and now they just want a chance to try it again. I've been doing that for actually in my classes for a couple of years now. And I find that students tell me, it used to be if I did poorly on a test, I would just say, oh, well, I'll never learn that stuff again. But in the class where they get actually 3 chances to take an exam, when they do poorly, they go back and they relearn. And then they take another different exam, different questions, and they try again and they've learned more. And then they do it a 3rd time and they learn more in order to bring up their score. And I try not to make it a penalty ever, so it's always their highest of the 3 scores that counts. So I'll even have students who got a perfect score the first time taking the exam again just to have different questions to answer to test themselves and check their knowledge and see if they can do it again if they already did well. Taking the exams away from being an evaluation and emphasizing that the exams are a learning opportunity. Another possibility for flexibility might be something like, you know, you want your students to write, say, 6 papers in the semester, brief papers that they'll get some feedback on. Well, what if you, instead of having it be 6, you make 8 opportunities for writing papers, and then they get to drop 2. That way, when something goes wrong, something happens, they're sick that day, they have a problem, you don't have to worry about giving this one an exception and evaluating this one's excuse. Everybody gets to drop 2 without any reason needing to be given, and then your life is so much easier. You don't have to deal with it anymore. So if we're able to find ways to be innovative, this is my example of one way that I try to do that. I don't remember what's on the next slide, so we should look at it and see what's there. So this is what I've been doing. I have been talking about how we might find ways to be flexible in the way we teach our courses, and basically plan ahead for the crises and problems that students have, whether it's being sick, being late for class, in times of emergency remote teaching, having difficulties with online access or equipment or tech access, as well as needing more chances to learn something or more flexibility in the way they participate in the class. If we do that ahead of time, we find ways to be more inclusive, to involve more students. I think my next slide is my references. I don't remember. Yep. So I really like the readings that are recommended on this page. These are all links. But some of these ideas I was surprised to realize have already been acted on by other people. So Matt Cheney developed something called cruelty-free syllabi and has a couple of links there about how to be cruelty-free in your syllabus. Kate Denial also has written about this as a pedagogy of kindness, compassion. Jennifer Gonzalez has a great blog called Cult of Pedagogy. She actually deals with K through 12 teaching, but a lot of that applies to higher ed as well. And then I really like the essay by Devin Price called Laziness Does Not Exist, which involves looking at what someone might do, and instead of just assuming that whatever they do, it must be because of something inside of them, like you're late for class, you must be lazy, you didn't do your paper, you must be unorganized. Devin Price recommends that we respond with more curiosity and finding out, well, what else is going on in your situation? What caused this to happen? And that what looks like laziness, even our own, quite often is actually something that's a response to other factors. So on this page in particular, I recommend these 4 links, 5 links actually. The next page is just a bunch of books that I've either referred to or that relate to the kinds of things that we've been talking about. But as we are coming up on 1 o'clock, I would like to see if anybody has questions or comments.
So I've just posted in the chat. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. You can chat them in and I'll relay them to Karen. I also wanted to mention one more time that all of those recommended reading links I've already put up on our event page, so you can go straight there and read about them. You also have the download link for the Little Orange book and the information about Dr. Mello's book that she co-wrote. I also wanted to do a little shout out. Monica Stansberry from El Centro College is actually a contributor to the book, and she's an active member of the consortium and one of the leaders in our developmental education group. So you've got some local input that's been part of it. I did have one comment from one person saying thanks so much, so I wanted to relay that to you, Karen. Anything else anybody would like to share?
While you think about it, I'll tell you a couple of other things that often do come up when I talk about this idea of flexibility as my innovation example. People sometimes will look at this and they'll think that I'm making things easier. In fact, when Gail Mello visited, she thought that maybe what I was doing by being more flexible in my classes was making things easier on students. And she was saying that she doesn't think we should do that. And I had to reassure her that it's not a matter of making things easier, although I am very much making things easier on myself. Because I don't have to worry about deadlines anymore, and I don't have to worry about makeup exams, and I don't have to, it's already built in. If somebody says, oh, I need to make up this quiz, or I need to retake this exam, it's already in place. But it is about creating flexibility so that students don't have to ask, so that they don't have to bother you. You're still maintaining the high standards. In fact, in some ways you've increased them by creating more opportunities. Students just still have to do as much as they ever did before to meet the obligations and the outcomes for the course. The other thing that people worry about is, will this really teach students self-regulation? Will they learn to be self-reliant? And in fact, this is exactly what Linda Nilsson recommends in her book that's also listed there, Creating Self-Regulated Learners, that you give them opportunities to be in charge of themselves so that we don't have to force them to just be obedient to our deadlines all the time.
And while you were speaking, Karen, Tammy Kinley put in the chat that she finds flexibility makes my job easier and makes students very happy. So she echoed your findings. And that's what I've done also. I find it's really important that assessments not just be what you learned as of X date at X time, but be that first opportunity for a student to demonstrate their competence. And then also always have opportunities for, revision, if it's an essay and resubmission, opportunities to retake an exam, because that reminds students that learning is a recursive process, right? And that our goals as instructors are for students to leave at the end of the class knowing all of the information that we've been trying to teach. And so we're finding that the people who participated in this particular event today seem to be those who are oriented that way.
Absolutely. And the question I always ask is, what if failure is not an option, if we can't accept that any of our students fail or drop or drop out, then how do we teach differently? If we have to get them to be successful without lowering our standards, what do we do? Quite often it's things like, let's give them earlier assessment more often with lower stakes. Let's give them more feedback. Let's give them more chances so that they're still doing exactly what we wanted them to do all along, but more of them are achieving that goal that we set out in the beginning. Thank you.
And our final comment from Nikita Fisher is, I'm a counselor at an early college high school. I truly appreciate this topic and this presentation. Thank you for creating a platform for this discussion. So what a nice way to end our hour together. Thank you again, Dr. Huxtable-Jester. Thank you again, Dr. Maxwell. And thank you to all of you who chose to spend the hour with us. As I mentioned before, all of the resources and the recording will be available on our event site. And so with that, I'll say goodbye for today, and we will see you for our next Monday Lunch and Learn next week. Bye, everyone.
Bye.